Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our webinar tonight. My name is Danielle Sims, and I'm a manager at our Virginia DEQ Central Office. One of our goals with this education series is to help share more information about DEQ programs and resources with the public. And you can visit deq.virginia.gov/edu series to watch previous webinars, to find handouts, as well as slide decks for previous presentations, or you can learn more about future webinars. So thank you for your time tonight to learn more about DEQ's work on water quantity planning. Tonight, I'll be monitoring our chat box for any questions you may have. Gwen McCrae here will be our speaker for the webinar, guiding us through the presentation. We're also joined by some subject matter experts, Weed and Chloe, and the water supply manager, as well as Hannah Summers, the water supply planning and analysis manager. And both are here to answer any technical questions you may have. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Gwen.
All right, thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and get off camera, as I think most of us are, just to save a little bandwidth for this evening. Again, thank you so much for being here tonight. Let me start by giving us just a quick introduction of the platform for those of you who have not used WebEx before, just to give you a sense of what the controls are. So as you can see, if you need to change your webinar settings, there should be a location. It may be on the left hand, it may be on the bottom. It looks different on different devices, but you should be able to see in audio settings if you need to change your audio settings. We are not going to be unmuting and raising hands this evening, but we will be utilizing the chat quite a bit. So I encourage you to take a minute to find the chat control. That should be probably in the bottom right-hand corner. It may be elsewhere if you're joining on a phone or a different device. But again, we will be using that chat quite a bit this evening. That's where you can put questions in, and we will pause several times throughout the webinar to answer those questions. We'll try to answer them in the order that you put them in, so feel free to pop them in at any point. One thing about the questions tonight, we will not be able to answer any questions that are about specific facilities or permits or things like that. But in that case, if you do have a question like that we can't answer tonight, or if we have lots of questions and we aren't able to get to all of them during the time of the webinar, we will follow up via email with anyone who puts a question in the chat. So don't hesitate to put those questions in and you will get answers to them. All right. So, quick overview of what our agenda is going to look like. So we are going to be first talking about kind of the universe of DEQ's water programs, what the different water offices and water programs are at DEQ. I'll just give you a general idea of them. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some definitions about water sources, because this webinar will really be focused on water supply, or the quantity of water that we have in Virginia. So it's good for us to have kind of all start at with the same definitions. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that we have to keep in mind when we are monitoring and managing water resources in Virginia. And then we're going to dig into some of the details about our Office of Water Supply and what the functions of that office are. And finally, we'll wrap it up with some action items and brainstorming about things that you and everyone who lives in Virginia can do to help us conserve our water resources. So during this webinar, we have a few objectives that we are hoping to help you achieve. The first one is that we hope that you'll learn a little bit more about the water programs at DEQ, specifically about the Office of Water Supply. We hope that you will understand a little bit more about the history and purpose of water supply planning and why we spend the resources that we do in order to do the work that we do in the Office of Water Supply. We want to help you be able to find regional water planning representatives. So I will talk a little bit towards the end of the webinar about what regional water planning looks like and how you can get involved there. And also to give you information and resources about droughts and drought conditions, so that you know where to find information about drought and where to find resources about what to do during droughts. So those are our objectives. Let's go ahead and get started with some of those definitions that I was talking about. So when we're thinking about the waters of Virginia, Virginia is a place that has a great diversity of water sources and water resources. So there are 100,000 miles of non-tidal streams and rivers in Virginia, which you can see a little bit of that on this map here. So what is a non-tidal river? The tides refer to ocean tides. So a non-tidal stream or a river is one that is not affected by tides, surges, and sea level. Usually these will be a little bit inland from the coast. Virginia has 3 main kind of large-scale watersheds of those non-tidal streams and rivers. The watersheds, meaning that the streams and rivers flow into that final destination. Our watershed destinations are the Chesapeake Bay, the North Carolina Sounds, and the Mississippi River, which eventually flows into the Gulf. And then within those larger systems, there are 9 major river watersheds in Virginia. So as I say these names, you may be very familiar with them. You might live nearby one of these rivers. Those are the Potomac and the Shenandoah watershed, the Rappahannock River watershed, the York River, James River, the Chowan River, the Roanoke River, the New River, the Tennessee River, and the Big Sandy River. So those are the 9 major watersheds in Virginia. Also in Virginia, we have 248 publicly owned lakes. So we have 2 lakes in Virginia that are naturally occurring lakes. One of those is Mountain Lake in Giles County, which is actually privately owned, but it does have public access. And the other one is Lake Drummond, which is in the Great Dismal Swamp in southeastern Virginia. Those are the 2 naturally occurring lakes in Virginia. The other 246 lakes are reservoirs that are created by dams. Also in Virginia, we have 236,000 acres of tidal and coastal wetlands and 808,000 acres of freshwater wetlands. So wetlands are areas that have wet soils, water tolerant plants, and they have water that's either on or near the surface of the land for at least part of the year. And our coastal wetlands have some amount of salt water, and they have lots of salt tolerant vegetation and wildlife as well. We also have 120 miles of Atlantic Ocean shoreline, which is mostly on the east side of the eastern shore, as well as the coastal areas south of the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay. And the shoreline of the tidal portions of the Chesapeake Bay, which is the part that goes inland, in from the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries, is an additional 7,213 miles of coast on the bay. And finally, we have 2,300 square miles of estuaries. And an estuary is a partially enclosed coastal body of water where the river water is mixed with seawater. A good example of an estuary is the Chesapeake Bay that we were just talking about. So in addition to that, these are all lots and lots of the surface waters of Virginia. Virginia also has groundwater resources that includes the Virginia Coastal Plain Aquifer System, which is made up of several aquifers and containment zones or groundwater. And I know I'm just throwing a lot of new terminology at you. We are going to talk a little bit more about what an aquifer is, what groundwater is. But those aquifers are at various depths from the surface. And then also in the central and western portions of the state, we have groundwater in aquifers in the Valley and Ridge, Blue Ridge, and Piedmont provinces. All right. So with all of that water in Virginia, the water programs at DEQ are a big part of the work that we do. So I want to talk just a little bit about what our water programs are and what the core responsibility of each of those water programs is. So the first one is the Chesapeake Bay program. Our Chesapeake Bay program office works with other state agencies and local governments and citizens to advance the goals of the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. That agreement is currently in the process of revisions for 2025 and beyond. We did hold a webinar in June of this year talking about more details about the Chesapeake Bay program and that Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And so if that's something that you're interested in and you didn't have a chance to watch it in June, do go to our website and check that out. We also have a water quality programs. We have several water quality programs that are working to achieve and maintain the goals of the Clean Water Act, which is a federal law. and the state water control law, which is a state law. The goals of those two laws are to protect human health, aquatic life, and other beneficial uses of our water resources. We also had a webinar about water quality and water quality monitoring last year. And again, that's something that you can find on our website if you want to take a look at the recordings or look at the resources from that one. Now, our water quantity programs, which is what we're going to talk in more detail about tonight. DEQ is responsible for the sustainable management of surface water and groundwater resources. Our agency also protects the beneficial uses of these resources, which includes water supply for aquatic life and recreation. We collect and analyze data about how water is used and what the availability, the amount of water is in the surface and groundwater. We are going to talk, as I said, in more detail about that as we go. One thing to note about the scope of what we'll be talking about tonight, we will be focusing on the Office of Water Supply Planning, which is not the same as water withdrawal permitting. We will mention water withdrawal permitting, but that's actually a different program, and we won't have time to talk about that in great detail tonight. But if it is something that you're interested in learning more about in the future, we encourage you to let us know in the chat or fill out the educational series survey that we have that you can find on our webpage. All right. Now, another one of our main water programs is the Wetlands and Streams Protection Program. So DEQ is tasked with protecting wetlands and streams to protect their beneficial uses. So as in the process of doing that, we administer the Virginia Water Protection Program. It's sometimes called VWP, which regulates impacts to our surface waters. So any activities that might impact surface waters, streams, wetlands, things like that, is regulated through that program. We also have a wastewater program. So wastewater is when water is used in a community. So your bathroom, your shower, your sink, dishwashers, washing machines, toilets, any place that you have utilized water in homes, businesses, and industries. So that's considered wastewater. Discharges of treated wastewater to surface waters are permitted under the Virginia Pollutant Discharge Elimination System program, which is also called VIPDES. Another program that we administer is the stormwater program. This one is a pretty big deal because there is lots of stormwater. Anytime that there's precipitation from the sky, that creates a stormwater drainage. So stormwater can be runoff from streets or lawns, parking lots, construction sites, industrial facilities. It may enter the water directly or through channel systems. And that does mean that sometimes if there are pollutants on the ground, they can enter into the water via stormwater. So our stormwater program regulates that process. We are the lead agency for developing and implementing Virginia's statewide program to protect water quality and quantity from stormwater runoff. So we issue permits, certify land disturbances, and work on compliance as well. We have also the Land Application and Beneficial Reuse Program. So beneficial reuse means that we have taken treated wastewater and put that into productive reuse by applying it back to the land, often as a fertilizer. So that kind of use of treated wastewater is regulated in Virginia by DEQ. And finally, we have the Clean Water Financing Program, which administers several funding programs that provide funding solutions and assistance to localities and organizations in Virginia to support the protection and enhancement of Virginia's water quality. So I know that that's a lot. I just kind of went through in very broad strokes about our different water programs. Again, we have some webinars that go into more detail about some of these. If there are others that I didn't mention that we have already done a webinar and you would like to have a webinar where we're digging into this in more detail, please let us know because we always like to get your suggestions and know what topics you want more information about. All right, so one of the big functions, the major functions of our water programs at DEQ is planning. So we have kind of two main programs that that are involved in water planning. Those are water quality planning and water quantity planning. So water quality planning is, again, in accordance with the Clean Water Act, which I mentioned before. That's a federal law to protect and clean up water quality that supports designated uses. And those are defined in that law. Some examples of designated uses are recreation, like swimming or boating, drinking water, fisheries, so supporting fishery industries, and also wildlife. And so water quality to support wildlife. For water quantity or water supply planning, the purpose is to understand how the way that we use water resources now may impact future use. So there are a few things that make a big impact on water supply, water quantity, and water resources. Those are precipitation, so how much water is falling from the sky in the form of snow or rain. Temperature can impact our water supply. The uses of water, such as agriculture or personal use, kind of public water use. So those are kind of the purposes of our two water planning functions. Some of the things that they do or the actions that they take on both sides. For water quality planning, they do a lot of monitoring of water quality. So they have a series of locations where they will go and monitor water quality. They take that data and analyze it to evaluate whether the water at the places that they have sampled it does protect and support those beneficial uses. And then they use that to do planning to protect or enhance the quality of the water. In the water quantity planning side, we do a lot of monitoring of the amounts of surface water and groundwater. Again, we analyze that data and then we work with regions to plan out water use for the future. For water quality planning, the main function or the main location where those functions happen is in the Office of Ecology at DEQ. And for water quantity planning, it's in the Office of Water Supply. All right. So now I've talked about kind of a big overview of the waters of Virginia and DEQ's water programs. I'm going to take a step back a little bit to go back to some definitions that I've already mentioned a few times, just to make sure that everybody understands kind of what are some of the terms and terminology that we're going to be using this evening. So first of all, we will talk quite a lot about groundwater. Groundwater is water that is below the surface of the land, so it's in the ground. That includes water that is below the lakes and below the riverbeds. So if you think about, if you walk into a lake, you're walking into the water, but you're still standing on the ground, even though your ankles are maybe submerged in the water. So any water that is below the ground underneath a lake or river is included in the definition of groundwater. So groundwater or water in the ground kind of fills in all the spaces in between soil particles and rocks. Now, surface water, on the other hand, is the water that is on top of the land. It's on the surface. That's going to include rivers and ponds and streams and lakes and wetlands. And it's pretty much all the water that's not in the ground. So all the water that is above on the surface is considered surface water. Now we have lots and lots of water on our planet. I'm actually going to take another big step back because, if you think about all those photographs that you see that they've taken of the Earth from the moon or from space, you can tell looking at that we are a water planet. But where is that water? So if we think about, I started this presentation with a slide about all of the incredible amounts of places that you'll find water in the Commonwealth of Virginia. But that actually accounts for a small portion of the water that is on the planet. So if we think about all of the water on the whole planet, the vast, vast majority of the water is in the oceans. So the vast majority of it is salt water, and only 2.5% of the Earth's water is fresh water, meaning that it's not salty. We rely on fresh water. That's what we need. That's what most plants and animals need to survive, is that fresh water. So that's a really important resource for us. Now, of that 2.5% of fresh water, again, more than half of it is not available to us because it's frozen in ice caps at the poles or in glaciers on the tops of mountains. So that's not available to us for use. About 30% of the world's fresh water is underground, and the remaining little bit more than 1% is surface water. So that's the water that you'll find in lakes and rivers and wetlands. Now, again, of that surface water, a big proportion of it is frozen. In the Commonwealth of Virginia, we don't have ground ice and permafrost, but in lots of other places in the world, there is. A lot of the surface water that is found around the world is in lakes, and then you have the remainder of it in rivers, soil moisture, and other places. So this is very generally, right? Like this is a statistics for the whole world. And so it's not exactly equivalent to the places that you'll find water in Virginia, but it can be really helpful just to get a sense of kind of how precious our fresh water is and how important it is that we conserve it and protect it. And in the process of doing that, we find that there are some considerations that we have to think about when we are planning for monitoring and planning for water supply and water resource protection. So in Virginia, freshwater use currently totals more than 5 billion gallons of water per day. So that's about 826 gallons of water that is used for each person who lives in the Commonwealth of Virginia every day. So 5 billion gallons of water per day. That's how much water our current use is. So what I want to do before I jump into some other descriptions on this slide is have everyone take a moment to go into the chat. Remember, go back and find that chat function and tell me, what are some of the ways that you think we use 5 billion gallons of water per day? So I'll give you all a moment to do that and let you start to put some answers into the chat. And sometimes it can take a little while to think of something or to find the chat box and write things down. We'll give you another minute or two. How do you think we're using that 5 billion gallons of water per day? All right, so one answer in the chat from our reliable subject matter expert. Public water supply. That's a very important one. That's, all of us residents of Virginia probably are using public water supply every day. Oh, okay. So it looks like I'm getting a direct message saying that the chat is turned off for the public. Well, that's unfortunate. Well, you tell you what then, I am going to go ahead and continue with my presentation, and we'll see on the back end if we can open that up for the public. If not, then that's okay. We'll just continue on. So let's think about what some of those different kinds of uses might be, right? There are kind of competing priorities. One of the really kind of critical, important parts of thinking about protecting our water supply resources is thinking about what are the uses, what do we need to use water for, and how do we decide which uses get priority. So that might be, as Whedon had put into the chat, public water supply. That's definitely one of the important uses for water. But what about other things like farming, whether it's livestock or agriculture of plants? You may have irrigation, recreation. We use water for recreation, whether it is swimming pools or, getting out onto the lake in your kayak, fishing, electric power generation is another use of water. That's actually really important because we need water in the generation of electricity, and we depend on that. So water really sustains not only all the people, but all the uses that the people have for living our modern lives, and also all the creatures that we share the environment with. So all those millions of plants and animals that also occupy our space here in Virginia. So it looks like I'm now seeing some things coming through in the chat. I'm going to pull those up and see. All right. So, okay. So someone put in the chat that data centers. So certainly I think that manufacturing, whether it's data centers or other kinds of activities, do often use water in their processes. Farming, I see that a couple of people said farming. Yeah, and a big one is definitely agriculture. Gas plants. Okay, so natural gas, using natural gas for the generation of power. Yep, that also, we use water in that process as well, whether it's natural gas, nuclear power generation, other things like that. So thank you everyone for popping those things into the chat. And I'm glad that we got the chat fixed, because then we'll be able to encourage some interaction as we go through. And if you were trying to write a question before and you weren't able to, now you can. So really one of the challenges that we face when we're thinking about water supply planning is setting priorities, because those priorities will be different for different people, and also they will change over time. So what are some of the other priorities, or what are some of the other challenges that we sometimes face? Or maybe we can think about this more as conditions and characteristics that we have to account for. So one of those is the geology, that's the rock and soil structures under our feet, and hydrology, or how water is distributed and flows over, under, and into the ground, how those impact water supply. An example of this might be that some soils and rocks on the surface are more permeable, which means that water can soak through and move through them easily. That can slow down the flow of water. It can encourage the water to soak into the ground, and then if it soaks through the ground, it can make its way to some of those groundwater aquifers that I mentioned earlier. And then other different kinds of soils and rocks have different properties that mean that some of them can hold water better, some of them are very impermeable, meaning that the water will not go through them, and so they may run off from the surface into streams and rivers. So there are also physical properties of the land and water. We can't really change the physics of water. We can't change the natural geological changes that take long time to change. But other changes, such as annual rainfall, land use, storm intensity, these are changes that happen very, very quickly. They can change quite drastically from year to year. So this can do things like affect the duration and severity of a drought. The intensity of storm events can affect how much water flows off the land in stormwater versus soaking into the ground. The way that we use land can also have an impact. So if you imagine, kind of an intense, like heavy rainstorm falling on a forest, the water is going to act differently falling there than it will if it falls on a parking lot. So, there are different places that the water is going to end up going because of the different land uses in those cases. So when we also, when we're looking at kind of the way that those can affect our water resources, we want to think about how the water is removed from the resources, it's removed from surface water and groundwater, and also how does it get back into surface water and groundwater. So sometimes you have, if there's just a precipitation event, and that may kind of recharge surface water. So you may have a reservoir that is kind of at a low level, it doesn't have a lot of water in it. If you get enough rain, precipitation over a period of time, the water levels will come back up. It kind of recharges that reservoir. The same thing can happen in a sense for groundwater. It's just a much slower process because natural recharging of groundwater, all that water has to make its way through all the soil and rock in between the surface and the location of a groundwater aquifer, and that takes some time. There is, however, there are ways to artificially recharge groundwater, which is quite interesting. So I think I just wanted to mention one project that is currently happening, which is the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, their program called SWIFT. And SWIFT stands for Sustainable Water Initiative for Tomorrow. And they are taking treated wastewater, purifying it further so that it meets drinking water standards. And then they inject it into the ground, into the Potomac aquifer, which is the primary water source for Eastern Virginia. So there is this process that is possible. It takes a lot of technological savvy to make it happen, but it is possible to kind of artificially recharge groundwater as well. So the other thing that we want to think about it's a challenge, it's a condition that we have to consider is what is our need for water going to be in the future? None of us have crystal balls, we can't tell for sure, but we want to make our best estimation about what our future needs for water supply are going to need. How is the population going to change? Where will the people be? Will they be in different locations? What kinds of activities are we going to need water for? What kinds of agriculture are we going to be using? What kinds of manufacturing activities might we be wanting to participate in? What are our priorities, right? And so we have to be balancing these priorities both for the present and also for the future. All right, so with that, I am going to take a pause. I'm going to let folks put some questions into the chat if they have them. And so we'll just kind of take a minute for people to type up any questions that you might have before we move on. Our subject matter experts are available to answer any of those questions because I know that I did just throw a lot at you. So also if you want me to go back and review any of that terminology that I used as well, please feel free to put that request into the chat. So we're going to just pause here for a second and give people a chance to put questions in the chat.
Someone has a question here. Do you regulate dams like the one in the photo here?
Yeah, hey, this is Whedon. Dams are regulated by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. They have a dam safety program. There are certain thresholds by use. There are certain thresholds that require regulation, high hazard dams, things along those nature. But DEQ is not part of that, but it is definitely an important it's an important program of the state. And if you have any questions, I'd invite you to look at the Department of Conservation and Recreation's webpage. They got a whole thing about it. So thank you for that question.
Another question we have here, how are consumptive uses versus those that go back into the system treated? Consumptive like evaporative cooling or a bottling plant?
Yeah, this is Hannah Summers. Feel free, the person who asked the question, to let me know, elaborate and let me know if this is answering the question there. But so certainly different facilities and different use types use water differently. So the example of using evaporative cooling or a bottling plant, right? So certainly the amount of water after it's withdrawn from either a surface water or groundwater source, the amount of water used and then returned back to that stream or original source or downstream source can be different. So the tricky part is that withdrawals are regulated based on the point of withdrawal. So the amount that's actually taken out of a stream, for example. However, our program does do a lot of work considering what the consumption, how that might impact downstream beneficial uses. So that's a whole other, we could spend all night talking about that, but I will point to two of our reports, our annual water resources report and our state water resources plan, that really dive into consumptive use for different use types. And if okay with you, Gwen, I can drop those resources into the chat.
Yeah, that's great. Please do put any resources that you have into the chat.
Another question we had, is where is the Hampton Roads area located? How are we defining Hampton Roads?
Geographically, it's Hampton Roads is the southeast portion of Virginia. The plant in question is along, down almost down towards the head of the Chesapeake Bay. So it's down that way.
All right, thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions in the chat. Did I miss any, Danielle?
No, those were all the questions for now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for putting your questions in there. Again, feel free to put questions in at any point, and we will have other question breaks later. I did want to mention for anyone who's interested that this picture is a picture of the Freeze Dam, which is on the New River in Grayson County in Western Virginia. So if anyone wants to look it up, that's which dam it is. All right, let's go ahead and continue with our presentation and start talking a little bit more in more detail about the Office of Water Supply. So DEQ's Office of Water Supply manages water resources, or monitors, monitors water resources through several integrated programs. Those are surface water investigations, the groundwater characterization and monitoring program, and water supply planning and analysis. The office tracks water withdrawal reporting. We'll talk in more detail about what that means later, and also prepares an annual water resources report. Hannah had just mentioned the most recent 2024 annual water resources report, which was released most recently. Now, the data and analysis from the Office of Water Supply Planning and Analysis supports regional water planning efforts and is also used for drought evaluation. And again, we'll talk more about all of these topics as we go through the webinar. Finally, there is as well, in addition to the Office of Water Supply, there is the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting. So the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting is concerned with water supply. So the two offices work very closely together. I would say that you might be able to think of the Office of Water Supply as monitoring water supply and the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting as managing water supply. We can kind of think of that in broad terms. I'm sure that Hannah and we didn't have a lot more nuance to that distinction. But again, those are two different offices. This evening, we will be really focused on the Office of Water Supply. And we won't be talking a whole lot about water withdrawal permitting. We will mention it a little bit. But as I mentioned earlier, if this is a topic that you're really interested in, I encourage you to let us know about that and be sure to put that into a survey or put it into the chat so that we can consider it the next time that when we're planning our next series of educational webinars. So we're going to talk about in more detail in the next section about some of the functions of the Office of Water Supply. And we're going to start by talking about the surface water investigations function. So our surface water and groundwater teams, both of them are focused on gathering data about how much water we have in Virginia, where it is, how it's moving around. The surface water in particular, the surface water investigation team, their their purpose is to measure how much water is flowing through the streams and rivers, how much water is in there, so that we have a pretty good sense of where our surface water is moving. So we do that through a monitoring network. We have a monitoring network spread throughout the Commonwealth. This is an example of one of those monitoring stations. We have, DEQ has 81 and counting stream gauges. That's what they're called. I will note that for those of you who are paying attention to spelling, stream gauges here looks like it's misspelled, but that is actually that's the use that the the United States Geological Survey has used that spelling for stream gauge for over 100 years, and so we kind of stick with it as tradition now at this point, even though most of the time we spell gauge with an extra U. So our stream gauges may look something like this. We have several different types of them, but they are measuring a variety of characteristics about the stream water flow and discharge. So this type of stream gauge is known as a stilling well. A stilling well like this, I'm going to show you a cross section of what that would look like. It will have pipes that intake water that go under the ground between the water and the base of the stilling well. So you can see that those pipes along the bottom of that diagram there. The water level in the well, the reason that you have those intake pipes there is so that the water level inside the well will be the same as the water level in the stream, and that helps us be able to measure the water level. The majority of our stream gauges take measurements every 15 minutes, so they're continuously monitoring. They take measurements every 15 minutes, and then about once an hour, they transmit that data to a central location via satellite. So that's going to measure the water level. Our stream also measures the discharge, which is how much water is flowing through the stream. They measure discharge at various locations. About every 6 to 8 weeks, they'll be at that same location to measure discharge. Sometimes they measure discharge by walking into the stream and measuring it that way. So they may walk across the stream. If the body of water is too deep or too dangerous to be walking into it, they may use other kinds of technology to measure the flow of water through the stream. Now we measure and calculate and publish that data. We share that data with the United States Geological Survey, also called the USGS, and they combine it. The USGS combines the data from our stream monitoring network with their own stream monitoring network, and then they publish that data. You can see this is an example of they have a real-time dashboard of stream data where you can see what those locations, where the locations are, find out what they're measuring, and kind of see what the status is for each of those monitoring stations as well. So it's a great resource if you're looking to see, just, if you're interested in a local stream or river, it can be really interesting to go and look at it. Or if you want to grab that data, that's all publicly available data. We use that data for planning, for withdrawals, so that data may be shared with the Office of Water Withdrawal as they are considering water withdrawal permits, and for drought evaluation, so that water is shared with our drought task force as they make their drought determinations. We'll talk more about that in a later slide. So that's our surface water investigations team. It's just a real simple overview of what they do. The surface water investigations team does have a video that they have on our YouTube page and our YouTube channel that's pretty interesting and kind of gets into more detail if you're interested in knowing more about how they do their monitoring. All right, now our groundwater characterization and monitoring team. So again, like the surface water investigations team, the groundwater characterization and monitoring team helps us understand more about the waters of Virginia. So their purpose is to understand where groundwater is, how much there is, and the quality of the groundwater in Virginia, particularly in groundwater management areas. So hold up, what's a groundwater management area? A groundwater management area is, you can see them on the map here. These are the only groundwater management areas in Virginia. So you can see they're all on the eastern part of the state. The State Water Control Board has established 2 groundwater management areas. The Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Area, which is in orange, and the Eastern Shore Groundwater Management Area, which is in yellow. Now that Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Area in orange has been expanded since it was first established, but this is the map that is the current extent of both of those groundwater management areas. So these are the parts of the state, the parts of Virginia Commonwealth that where we do manage groundwater. In the rest of the state, we do monitor groundwater, but it's not managed under the same authority that the groundwater management areas are. So how do we monitor groundwater? So as with surface water, groundwater monitoring has a network of monitoring stations. For groundwater, those are called observation wells. You can see in this map of Virginia, which is the location of DEQ's observation wells. We have about 290 of them, again, and counting. The majority of those observation wells are in the groundwater management areas you can see on the eastern part of the state, but we do have them throughout the state. So a groundwater observation well has to be drilled down through the soil and rock into an area where there is enough groundwater to manage. So we will drill them into aquifers, which are the locations under the ground where the water kind of collects and stays. And we'll have observation wells that are drilled down to those areas. So the way that this works, you can see on the diagram here, you can see how the groundwater observation wells are drilled down into the ground. The observation well on the right is drilled down into an unconfined aquifer, which is closer to the surface. Now it's called an unconfined aquifer because it has interaction with the surface water. You can see that it is potentially interacting with the stream, that there is rainwater that may be recharging the aquifer by soaking through the soil and rock into that area. We also have a diagram on the left side. You can see that there is an observation well that's drilled through the unconfined aquifer, through some more impermeable soil and rock, and all the way into a confined aquifer, which means that it is not interacting with the surface water. It's separated from the surface water. So we do have monitoring wells that will measure groundwater levels in both types of aquifers. We have both types of aquifers in the Commonwealth. So some of the data is used to provide technical support to stakeholders. So folks who may be using groundwater for whatever purposes that they need it for. We also do sample for quality of the water, as we mentioned before. It is important to understand that it's not the same as the water quality monitoring that our water quality planning team and our water quality monitoring team does. It's a little bit different because the groundwater characterization and monitoring team is sampling the quality of the groundwater so that we understand how and whether it can be used, or whether there might be something that is impacting our ability to use that groundwater, to extract that groundwater for use. So that's kind of the main purpose of our monitoring of the water quality for groundwater. So it's really important for us to be able to understand the level of water in our groundwater resources. That helps inform the the determination about whether we are in drought conditions. We can provide technical support to permittees and other stakeholders, and again, kind of share that information as needed across the different units in DEQ as well. All right, so that is some of the main information about the data gathering functions of our Office of Water Supply Planning. And I'm going to pause now for another question break in case anyone's interested. This photograph is a picture of the Piney River. which is on the border between Nelson County and Amherst County in the Blue Ridge Mountains. So we'll go ahead and pause now because I think I did see at least one question in the chat, and we'll give people another chance to add more questions if they have them.
This is Whedon, and Brent, thank you for your question. Good to have you on the webinar tonight. Brent had asked how the two offices interact, and the offices being the Office of Water Supply and the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting. And Hannah may be able to elaborate on this afterwards if I missed something, but we're very much intertwined. In fact, the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting used to be part of the Office of Water Supply up until a couple of years ago when it was deemed necessary to be its own thing. We still maintain a very tight relationship. The water quantity measurements that we make both through groundwater and surface water kind of feed into the decisions that are made with permitting and withdrawals. And water supply planning and analysis is important in taking some of that quantity data and doing technical evaluations to ensure that the amount of water that's proposed to be withdrawn is not going to cause any sort of detriment to the environment. Also, the groundwater levels that are the groundwater characterization and monitoring team measure go into similar technical evaluations based on groundwater to make sure that the withdrawal is not going to cause impact, something was known as a critical cell, where the aquifers have been depleted to a point where it's an issue. Brent, I don't know if that answers your question. Hannah, I don't know, did I miss anything?
No, I think that's a great overview. I just wanted to add a little bit more from my perspective with the Water Supply Planning and Analysis Program, which you mentioned is one of the programs within the overall Office of Water Supply. You had noted, right, that the data for withdrawals, whether they're permitted or not, is really intertwined. And so the resources that I shared, the annual water resources report and the state water resources plan, when we talk about use data, water withdrawal data, that includes everything that is that either has a permit and are reporting through that permit, or users that are reporting withdrawals to our program, which are those that don't necessarily have a permit, but they fall above a threshold that requires reporting of withdrawals. So there's a lot of overlap there. And the other thing I'll add is that while our program does coordinate with the permitting program, as you mentioned, they are separate programs. So the ultimate permitting decision and more information on the permitting program would come from those folks. But our program does coordinate when a water withdrawal permit application comes in. So our responsibility is providing information that is within water supply plans, any water planning information that we're aware of, and then also where surface water withdrawal permits come in, our modeling team also takes a look at, as you mentioned, Whedon, impacts to downstream users and beneficial uses downstream. So there is quite a bit of coordination that happens there, but I'm sure there's more to unpack on the permitting side, and we can always point folks in the direction of those contacts too.
There was a follow-up question to that. Do you mean water withdrawn from a single intake?
We may need a bit of elaboration there just to make sure we're answering properly.
Okay, we'll connect offline to answer that one. Another question we have is, where is the location of the groundwater monitoring in Albemarle County?
Specifically, I can't tell you right now. I'd have to go and take a look at our network. Basically, we do have a lot on the eastern side, but we're moving west. So I'll get back with you in a second. Let me just kind of dive in and see where the nearest well is.
those are all the questions we have for now.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for your questions. Keep them coming. So what I will do in our last section is to talk a little bit more about some of the functions of analysis and reporting that is done by our Office of Water Supply. So our office, the water supply planning and analysis team that Hannah was talking about, their goal is to ensure adequate and safe drinking water for all Virginians while encouraging, promoting, and protecting aquatic life, recreation, and other beneficial uses. So they're responsible for a variety of programmatic tasks, right? Like there are a variety of things that team does. First of all, they do work within our regulatory framework. They make sure that data, reporting, and other requirements are met, and then they work on any regulatory changes and updates when those things are called for. They also analyze trends and produce the Virginia Annual Water Resources Report that is submitted each October to the Governor and the General Assembly. The 2024 report, you see a photograph of the front page of that report here. That uses our 2023 data because that was the full year of data that was available for analysis, and that is available on our website. And I believe that Hannah had put a link to that into the chat. They also do surface water modeling, which may be needed for analysis and decision-making about water withdrawals and water permitting. Again, Hannah mentioned that, so that's a really important part of the coordination between the Office of Water Supply Planning and Analysis and the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting. They also provide technical assistance to localities for their water supply and water planning functions. So all of our localities in the Commonwealth will be paying attention to the water resources in their region and their locality, and our office gives them technical assistance as needed to help them with their planning and management of their water supply. The water supply planning and analysis team also supports planning for the future. Now, in the past, they had developed a 5-year state water resources plan. So that was what was required for statewide water resources. Now that process has been changed. It's moving to a watershed and locality focused framework for resource planning. We will talk about that a little bit more in a future slide. And then they also support drought monitoring and assessment. So they are looking for the information that might be helpful, gathering the information that is collected by our surface water investigation team and our groundwater characterization and monitoring team, and doing any analysis that may be needed there, and then supporting that data, providing that data to our drought task force, which is the body that is charged with making drought condition determinations. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the data that team comes up with. One of the tasks of our water supply planning and analysis team is to compile and analyze water withdrawal data and trends of 7 use categories in the Commonwealth, which I'll talk about in a little bit more detail in a moment, and then publish that annual water resources report. So I am going to talk about some of the data from that most recent report, but first, in the chat, I want to ask, what are some of the uses that you think are used most commonly in Virginia? So kind of what are the actually let me give you a clue. So I'm going to tell you what the use categories are that our office uses to categorize the data, and then I want to see if you can put into the chat which ones you think are the biggest users of water. So the use categories include 2 different kinds of agriculture. So agricultural generally, and then specifically irrigation. Also manufacturing, public water supply, mining, commercial uses, and power generation. So of those uses, those are our use categories. Which are the ones in the chat? Pop it in the chat. Which are the ones that you think are probably likely to be the most, the highest users of water use? I'm seeing power generation, mining, and agriculture. Okay. Seeing commercial use and mining. All right. Got some good suggestions in there. Irrigation. Yeah, certainly irrigation and agriculture. We think those, we have to understand what big users of water they are for sure. All right. Keep those coming. We'll talk a little bit about what some of these trends are. And again, you can find the data, more detail about the data in our annual water resources report. So the largest user of water in the Commonwealth is power generation. So power generation includes withdrawals for fossil fuel power and nuclear power generation. They are the largest user. In 2023, they used about 4 billion gallons of water per day in the process of power generation. Now, keep in mind that that is largely non-consumptive use, so most of that water is being returned to its source. But power generation withdrawals account for about 75% of total withdrawals. So it is by far the largest user of water withdrawals. Now, the next highest is public water supply. That uses around 820 million gallons of water per day. So what that means is this is water that is withdrawn from surface or groundwater and then sent to water treatment plants for use by homes and businesses that are served by water utilities. So if you are hooked up to municipality, city, county water, or the water utility in your area, then that's what we're talking about. That's what public water supply is. Actually, I'm going to pause for a second because we have a question that refers specifically to that about whether that includes industrial use. Industrial use, there are other categories that probably encompass industrial use, but let me pause for a second and see if Hannah or Whedon has a better, more nuanced answer to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here. So industrial use is a use category. And so if you look at our annual water resources report, you will see manufacturing listed. This next round of the annual report that's being developed will say industrial, but for the purposes of data collection, they mean the same thing. What that doesn't include is any communities, so that's like residential use, commercial use, industrial use, that is supplied by public water supply. So the difference here is that the data analysis, so when data is collected, it is collected based on point of withdrawal. So in this example, if a public water supply withdraws water from a river, that public water supply has a service area, which is essentially like the geographic area that their water infrastructure can allow them to provide water. So in that geographic area. So the ways they then provide water can be different, and it's really up to that public water supply how they do that. So I include that to say, right, that there are industrial, commercial, residential uses that are captured within that public water supply category, but they are not disaggregated in the annual report. And that is because there is no requirement for that data to be disaggregated through the annual water withdrawal reporting process. If that's confusing, I completely understand. There is a better explanation in the annual water resources report, and I'm certainly happy to dive into this topic with anybody outside of the webinar if you have additional questions.
So Hannah, I'm just going to clarify my understanding of that to see if I got that right. So it sounds like what you're saying is that if there's a public water utility that has withdrawn water from surface or groundwater and treated that water in their water treatment plant, and then through the system of distribution, there is some manufacturing plant that utilizes the water from that water treatment plant, that would be captured under public water supply.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great summary. And so that's then different than, say, you have manufacturing up on the screen.
Yeah.
There is such a thing as, right, like a manufacturing facility that has its own supply, say like it has its own well on site and it's withdrawing groundwater for only its facility. That would be captured strictly under that like manufacturing umbrella.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Mhm.
So yes, the manufacturing category is the third largest use category for water in the data from the 2024 report. In 2023, that was accounted for about 350 million gallons per day. So again, that would be water that was withdrawn specifically for the use on a facility or a site for manufacturing. The next two use categories are agriculture and irrigation. They are calculated separately. And so when you account for them separately, they utilized 26 million gallons per day for agriculture and 22 million gallons per day for irrigation. Even if you put those together, that's still 48 million gallons per day. Did I say just gallons? I meant to say million gallons per day, which is quite a bit smaller than the top three categories. So again, agriculture utilized 26 million gallons per day and irrigation 22 million gallons per day. The final two use categories are mining. Mining withdrawals accounted for about 21 million gallons per day, and commercial withdrawals were about 13 million gallons per day. So those are some of the types of data that you can find in the annual water resources report. So again, the 2024 report is available on our website now. And as Hannah mentioned, they are currently working on the next report to be submitted later this year. So a lot of the work that the water supply planning and analysis team does is also put towards technical assistance and support for the water supply planning process. So a lot of that data and analysis helps our regional planning areas to plan for the future. So the water supply planning process, as I think I mentioned it a little bit before, it used to be that DEQ would work on developing a 5-year state water resources plan. That has been changed, and our new process is focused on regional planning areas that are watershed, kind of located in watersheds. So they are localities will be working collaboratively within their regions, working with this, the same watershed resource. So for example, a section of the James River or a section of the Shenandoah River, or etc. So that water supply planning process is this very long-term effort, and it is collaborative, and it involves lots of state and local stakeholders who are coming together to make a plan for their region. The localities are the ones that take the lead role in identifying the needs of their communities. So it's really putting that planning authority at the local level. Now, DEQ provides technical analysis and oversight to make sure that we have regional plans developed for each of those regions. So again, it is a new process. So we are currently in the process of developing those regional planning areas. It's focused on river basins. As you can see in this map, there are 25 regional planning areas that have been designated. And so if you wanted to take a moment, you can find your locality and find out which region it is located in, so that you'll know which other localities your locality is working with collaboratively to do that regional planning process. They consider water supply risks and are involving stakeholders in water supply is a really important part of this process. So again, our team supports that regional water planning by providing support, data, and technical assistance, offering any resources that they might need, and also facilitating grant funding for that planning process for the first 2 years, because we are currently going through the initial regional planning process. I will talk a little bit more about that as we get to ways that you can get involved. But it's good to know kind of you can come back to this this resource to be able to find the name of your regional planning area if you wanted to get in touch with that person, with the people who are involved. If you want to find contacts at DEQ around water planning, you can use this map and this contact information to find that that information. I'll leave this up here for a second, but also we will be sharing the slides afterwards, so you don't have to grab it off the slide right now. You'll be able to refer back to it later. This also is information that's on our website. All right. Now, finally, one of the things that our water supply planning and analysis team does is to help use, provide data that is used to evaluate for drought conditions. So the Virginia Drought Monitoring Task Force is comprised of state agencies, the Virginia Department of Health Office of Drinking Water, and VDACs, or the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Commercial Services, and federal partners, including the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Agency, and the National Weather Service. They all meet regularly to assess the information provided to them by DEQ and other information that they bring in order to make decisions about whether droughts need to be designated. So they organize that evaluation process in a regional approach. So you can see here on this map, you'll see the different drought evaluation regions in the Commonwealth. This is available on our website. I just pulled this off earlier late last month, and I'll also show you an example of some of the information that you can find that's kept updated. For example, this is a drought conditions map. If you go to the drought webpage on our website, you'll be able to find updated information about the drought conditions map and currently what the conditions are set by the the Virginia Drought Monitoring Task Force. So DEQ's data and indicators are a part of that, but there's also other data that is used to determine when it is merited to declare a drought advisory. There are 4 indicators that are considered by the task force. Those include precipitation, so how much water is coming down in the form of rain or snow. The groundwater, what the groundwater levels are. Again, that is some of that information is going to come from our groundwater monitoring network. Some of it may come from USGS and other sources. Stream flow, so that's information that would come from our surface water investigations team as well as other sources. And finally, reservoir levels. So of those 246 reservoirs that we have around the state, there are monitoring the levels in those reservoirs so that that data can be used to make determinations about drought conditions as well. So you can find the link to the drought conditions page on our DEQ website. I think we've put that into the chat. And there's also lots of really helpful kind of drought preparedness resources online. So some good places to look include the American Red Cross. They have some really good resources about drought readiness, and from ready.gov, which is a federal government resource that has information about preparing for natural disasters, including drought conditions. All right. And then as we kind of get closer to the end of our webinar, I have a few slides about water withdrawals. So we've talked a little bit about water withdrawals. The data that we gather and analyze is used to help monitor water withdrawals and water use. So first of all, just again, for definitional purposes, what is a water withdrawal? So the colloquial definition, kind of the definition that we might use in everyday conversation, would be just taking water from surface water or from groundwater. But there are some very specific legal definitions. So specifically for surface water withdrawals, there is a statutory definition. And in that definition, surface water withdrawal means removing a removal or diversion of surface water in Virginia or from the Potomac River for consumptive or non-consumptive use, thereby altering the in-stream flow or hydrological regime of the surface water. So projects that do not alter the in-stream flow or that alter the in-stream flow, but whose sole purpose is flood control or stormwater management are not included in that definition. So it is possible for there to be what we would call that's withdrawing water, but because it doesn't meet that statutory definition, it doesn't meet that definition for the purposes of regulation. So it's just important to keep in mind that if you're looking for information about water withdrawals, understand that particularly for surface water withdrawals, there's a very specific legal definition. So one of the things that that our team does is to collect all the information about withdrawal reporting. So there are some withdrawals, I think Hannah mentioned this earlier, there are some withdrawals that may not be permitted. They don't reach the threshold of requiring a permit, but they do require reporting. So some things that need to be reported, for example, include withdrawals or crop production, so for irrigation purposes, of 1 million gallons per month or more. That may not require a permit, but it would require reporting. Withdrawals that average over 10,000 gallons per day for over a month. So that is another example of a type or an amount of a withdrawal that might not require a permit, but probably requires reporting. Now, we do encourage reporting even when withdrawals don't meet that threshold, because it's much easier for us to have accurate information to be able to analyze the conditions of the water resources in Virginia if we have those withdrawal reports. So how do they report? Reporters create accounts on My DEQ, which is a platform on our website, and they use that portal to report their withdrawals. Now, we can also use methodologies to estimate unreported water withdrawals. So, for example, our team has been recently cooperating with some Virginia Tech researchers, improving the methodology for being able to estimate agricultural water withdrawals at the county level. Like, how can we better estimate for those withdrawals that we know are occurring but are not reported? How do we get a good estimate of what those withdrawals might have been? So that's pretty important information for us to have. And again, it's great if it's actually reported, but if not, we do have some methodologies for estimating. We organize those into those use categories that we were talking about before. It's really important and helpful for us to be able to analyze the data in that way. Now, drinking water withdrawals, we mentioned before that DEQ does regulate withdrawals for public water supply and for some private wells, depending on the quantity generally. But it's important to understand the division of authorities here. The Virginia Department of Health regulates private wells and enforces drinking water quality regulations and standards. The standards of the Virginia Public Water Supply Law and the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. So while we might be regulating the withdrawals and the quantity, it's VDH that is regulating the standards, drinking water standards. All right. So when we're talking about water withdrawals in Virginia, the data from the Office of Water Supply is shared with the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting for their consideration when they're reviewing applications for permitted withdrawals. So some of those permitted withdrawals might be groundwater withdrawals. Permitted withdrawals are only required in groundwater management areas, that eastern and eastern shore groundwater management areas. And then there are certain levels at which those permits might be required. Generally, that's around 300,000 gallons per month, but there may be some distinctions in terms of how that use is calculated. In 2023, DEQ issued 91 permits for groundwater withdrawals. There may also be surface water withdrawal permits. Again, often those might be withdrawals that are over 10,000 gallons per day. Those may need a permit. In 2023, DEQ issued 15 permits for surface water withdrawals. Now, there are also unpermitted withdrawals. I was just talking a little bit about that. So these are withdrawals that don't reach the threshold for permits, for requiring permits, but some, and then some, but not all of those do have reporting requirements. Now, again, we won't be going into detail about water withdrawal permitting, but just be aware that the Office of Water Withdrawal Permitting is responsible for that permitting process. And also they are responsible for monitoring for compliance with those permits. And if you're interested in learning more, please let us know. I've seen a couple people put into the chat that they might be interested in that. So we will certainly take that into consideration when we are planning our next education series. Okay, and then I'm going to wrap us up here in the last few minutes with some of the ways that you can be involved in water supply planning. So one way is to either participate in, if that is an appropriate for your role, or to observe and make public comments at advisory committees. For example, the Eastern Virginia Groundwater Management Advisory Committee meets 4 times per fiscal year. You can find information about their meetings online. There's also an advisory committee for the Virginia Roanoke River Basin Advisory. And they are an advisory committee to the Virginia delegation to the Roanoke River Basin Bi-State Commission, and they meet periodically. You need to look on the website to find when their next meeting is planned, if there is one planned currently. Another way that you can get involved is to contact your local and regional water supply planning representatives to talk about, discuss ways to get involved in the planning process. If that's something that is interesting to you, if you want to be involved as a stakeholder in that process, you could get in touch with them to talk to them about what that process would look like. You can also, when we were talking about regional watershed planning, comment on the draft regional water plans, which are going to be in development over the next couple of years. Those plans are due in 2029, and prior to that due date, they are required to have public comment process. So there will be public opportunities for public comment on all of the regional water plans in the next couple of years. Of course, learning more about water quantity and water supply issues is always helpful. And you can start with some of the resources that we're sharing this evening. And finally, you can absolutely take action yourself and do kind of personal things that you can do in your daily life to conserve and protect water. Now, rather than me giving you a list of things that you can do to preserve and protect water, I wanted to have our last opportunity here to jump into the chat to give us some ideas about ways that you currently do or think you could act in your own life to conserve and protect water resources. And this is also a good opportunity for you to put any final questions into the chat that you might have as we wrap up. I do see that we're going to start to get some questions in here, so that'll be great. But also put in here, what are some of the ways that you think you can conserve and protect water resources? All right, so I'm seeing, for example, using extra water to water plants. Yes, that's an excellent one. I've actually just started doing this. I was emptying my pet's water dish when I dump it out to give them fresh water. I've been putting it in my potted plants instead of throwing it down the drain. So I figured that's a good way to use some extra water. What are some other ideas about conserving water, conserving our water resources, protecting our water? Putting oil in a separate container instead of putting it down the drain. That will also conserve your wastewater treatment plants. They'll be very happy if we avoid putting oil down the drain. Or if you have a septic tank, it's probably best not to put too much oil down that drain. Those are good ideas. Of course, things like, it could be something as simple as taking a shorter shower. People can find appliances and high efficiency high efficiency appliances, whether that's, you know, complicated appliances like a dishwasher or just low flow showers, things like that. Even just paying attention to how much water you're using. If you're on a water utility and you get a water bill every quarter, even just paying attention to what your water use has been can sometimes be a great way to conserve water. Only using dishwashers and clothes washers when you have a full load is a good way. Using, you know, or you can think about things that you can do outdoors as well. So if you have a yard, you could plant drought tolerant plants that don't need as much watering during the hot heat of the summer. You know, if you do need to water your plants, do it earlier in the day when the temperatures are cooler. Set up a rain barrel so that you can use rainwater to water things outside. So there's lots of things that we can do to conserve water. So very much appreciate your participation there in the chat. And I see that there are some questions that are going to come up. So I'm going to go ahead and put us here on our last question slide. First, I just want to quickly revisit what our objectives were. You can take a look at what these objectives were. We hope that we have helped you to achieve these objectives. There will be a very short survey that will pop up when you close the webinar. And if you have a moment to fill that out, that would be really helpful for us. And let's go ahead and finish up with some final questions. And in case anyone is wondering about this location, this is the Cobbs Creek Reservoir Dam at the Virgil R. Hazlett Reservoir in Cumberland County. All right, so I'm going to
We're running a little short on time right now, so I'll read 2 questions that we have at the moment, and then we can try to answer any questions offline since we're close to 8 o'clock and I want to be respectful of folks' time. One question is, are citizen science initiatives like Friends of the Shenandoah River helpful for protecting water?
Yeah, and this is Whedon, and Andy, thank you for your question. Absolutely, absolutely indeed. You know, we engage with many citizen science groups throughout the Commonwealth. They are, you know, they provide a, you know, extra eyes on the ground in terms of monitoring water quality. We have an entire, you know, program devoted to it. So absolutely encourage folks to get involved and engage with their local, you know, friends of groups in the areas and the watersheds that they live in. Thank you.
We another question, if we can talk about what happens when the regional water supply plans are submitted and approved, and how are they utilized?
Sure. I can give a high level answer to that one. And as you mentioned, we can talk more about this offline as we have time to. So the regional plans are due to DEQ in October of 2029. Once they are submitted to DEQ, there is a compliance and review process that our staff conducts. I will note that there are existing water supply plans. Some of them are local and some of them are regional. So there are already plans in existence that localities are using now, consulting with as they plan for their current and future supply. The plans that will be submitted in 2029 are also required to look at both current and proposed, so future systems that will provide water for public supply and for other uses. And they're really intended to be a living document. So they have to be updated every 5 years with any major changes to water supply. And the goal is that they are referenced by both those in local governments that are planning for the supply infrastructure and the longevity of supply in Virginia, but are also available so that the public can be tuned in on what is currently in place and what the state of our water is across the whole state in each of these plans. So lots more to say there, but yes, certainly they are, they're critical in long-term water planning.
Okay, those are all the questions we have at this time. And if anyone has any additional questions, we are happy to answer them offline or answer them through email or a phone call.
Great. Well, I would just like to say then thank you everyone for participating this evening. We really appreciate you taking time out of your evening to join us and learn more about water supply planning at DEQ. Thank you also to Whedon and Hannah for joining us this evening. Having those subject matter experts here is always helpful to give us a lot more detail and context for the questions that you have. We really appreciate their participation and your participation. I hope you all have a wonderful evening and that you will join us at our next webinar as well. Our final webinar of the year will be on December 9th. So if you are interested in learning more about funding opportunities that DEQ has, please make sure that you sign up for that. And we have lots of really good material for that final webinar coming up. And also, if you have any other suggestions for future topics that you would like more information on, please let us know. So again, thank you very much for joining us this evening and have a wonderful night.